I want to introduce Stephen Snider. He's a North Carolina native and has been a passionate student of Thomas Berry since he was in high school in the late 1980s. I don't actually, where are you, Steve? Ah, great. Okay, great. He's the executive director of the Downtown Oakland and Lake Merritt Uptown District Associations and the co-founder and co-owner of Oakland Venue Management. From 1997 to the present, Steve has worked to improve the quality of life in downtown Oakland and to maximize its potential by increasing cultural vibrancy through supporting small businesses, activating public spaces, public art programs, and new businesses. Steve has a bachelor's degree in contemporary religious studies from Prescott College and a master's in humanities and leadership with an emphasis in creation-centered spirituality from the New College of California. So let's welcome Steve.
Good afternoon. How y'all doing? It's been a long day. Lots of good information. Reminds me of the old days in Oakland, California 22 years ago. It's a lot of fun to be back in this type of environment. Soak it in. This is some good stuff. So I was just going to share a little bit of my history. My story and Drew's story are sort of woven together over the years. So I was going to tell a little bit of that history. But it's really about, obviously the Thomas Berry phrase, it's all a question of story. Today I wanted to tell a story about a question. And I'd like to reflect on that question and the lifelong journey that was started by this very question. In 1974, I was a 5-year-old kindergarten student at St. Thomas Elementary School in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It was a little afternoon and my mother had just picked me up in our yellow and brown Country Squire station wagon. It was just the two of us in the car as we were making the short 10 or 15 minute drive back to our hometown, neighboring town of Durham, North Carolina. And for whatever reason, maybe it was something I heard at school that day. It was a Catholic school, by the way, if you couldn't tell. Or maybe it was just my young, inquisitive mind, but I sat in the passenger seat that afternoon and I looked over to my mother, and out of the blue, and in all seriousness, I asked, "Mommy, where did the universe come from?" I could tell by her delayed reaction, and I could see the wheels spinning in her head. And she gave me a pretty predictable answer. She said, "Well, Stevie, God created the universe." And I'm like, Sat silently in the passenger seat. My little philosopher mind was spinning. My head tipped back and forth, just like my mother's had done a few minutes before. And I said, "Well, if God created the universe, then how was God created? Did he just say abracadabra?" And I'm sure you can imagine my mother started laughing hysterically. And when my mother laughs, it's really a laugh. And she was trying to hold on to the steering wheel and she's trying to wipe her face. It's like drool and tears. And she just thinks it's the funniest thing in the world. And with that reaction, I knew right then and there that my mother did not have all the answers. And prior to that moment, I thought parents were all knowing and that they had the answer to absolutely everything. But for me, even as a 5-year-old child, the answer, God created the universe, was incomplete and unsatisfying. My little philosopher's mind just could not accept that answer. But it was this very question that sent me on a lifelong journey to discover at least an answer that could help explain this great mystery to me in a more complete, satisfying, and believable way. It was this question that led me, when I was a senior in high school, to randomly discover this book, this actual book in an independent bookstore in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, The Universe is a Green Dragon, by our friend Brian Swim, who we called Brian Swimey. And I really purchased it because of these phenomenal pictures in the front. I remember in that same bookstore, this was 1987 or 88, I often saw The Dream of the Earth sitting there on this big display. Thomas is also from North Carolina. And I remember picking it up and saying, and it was a lot thicker, and just, I was like, I don't know. I like the cover picture. It was a phenomenal cover picture, but I was not ready to read The Dream of the Earth quite yet. But I did stumble upon this, and I wasn't somebody that was necessarily reading a whole lot in high school. And the pictures were worth 1,000 words, of course. But it was this question that, led Drew and I to also eventually discover, because this is basically Barry's thought put into a question between dialogue and youth. We eventually did discover the Dream of the Earth and read that. But Drew and I went to Prescott College together, and we tracked down Thomas Berry. This is before the internet. Somebody referenced that earlier. We had no idea who these people were and how to track them down, but somehow a teacher at our college, at Prescott College, had a previous relationship with Thomas Berry, and we said, "Oh, he's alive." We were then lucky enough to find out about a summer school program in a CC Italy. It was called Study Abroad for the Earth, that our friend and teacher Elizabeth Ferrero out of St. Thomas University organized. We also got to travel to Ecuador with Thomas, and he became a great friend and a mentor. And Karen, who was so passionate earlier, joined us, I believe, in Ecuador, correct? Really an amazing experience to study with Thomas Berry in those environments. And Drew and I actually just published, we both have essays in this new book that Elizabeth put together called Thomas Berry in Italy. So I encourage you to pick up the book or to go to thomasberry.org. They just do such a great job curating material that my essay and a CC of the mind about my experience studying with Thomas is in there. And Drew has a fabulous essay as well. So it's kind of a cheat sheet to what it would have been like to study with Thomas Berry in a CC Italy for 3 summers. But because I knew Thomas so well, I believe that if he had picked me up from kindergarten that afternoon in 1974, he would have given me a slightly more complete and fulfilling answer. And I'm not exactly sure I would have understood it all, but he most certainly would have had something interesting to say. After all, he did spend a lifetime engaged with such questions. And Tom might have said, and actually I wanted Drew to come up because he does the best Thomas Berry that I know. So I wanted Drew to do the Thomas Berry. I've dreamed of this moment for a long time where Drew, I'm the youth, and Thomas is answering the question, where did the universe come from, as I asked my mother. Okay, so he's driving. Tom?
Well, Stephen, the universe is self-creation within a divine context. And this divine context could be referred to as God, if you choose, or it could be called the Great Mystery, or whatever you want to call it. Or it could be referred to as the Great Spirit, in which all things in the universe live and move and have their being. But you have to understand this, my friend. God is not constantly running the show as though the universe were made up of puppets. It's not a puppet show. You are not a puppet. The universe and the divine and you, Stephen, are one reality, a reality functioning from within its own spontaneity.
Now, why couldn't my mother just have told me that? That actually mostly is exactly what Barry says in this book, which I've read a few times, as you can tell. You'll find a similar quote in there where he says, that the universe is not a puppet show. You are not a puppet. And I just love that, growing up in the South and being immersed in a fundamentalist Christian society in large part, and debating with my family for years, turning them on to Matthew Fox's work and having them tell me things that we can't say here about, the evil of these Christian thinkers that are co-opting for the devil. It was unsettling, to say the least. But as you can tell, I was a philosopher from an early age, and it wasn't until many years later that I realized that my early childhood experiences influenced the direction of my intellectual, spiritual, and philosophical interests as a young adult, eventually leading to the discovery of Swim and Barry and Matt Fox in the late 80s. As I mentioned, and as you know, I grew up with Drew. I met him when we were 5 years old at a summer camp. So we're going on 45 years of friendship. Right around the time, I guess, Matt was getting going in his project. We were just getting going in life. And we shared interest, mutual interests and intellectual interest. And I think my claim to fame is that I turned Drew on to the new cosmology and the work of these great thinkers. And as we know, Drew's done incredible work in the world, sharing that wisdom, as Karen was saying we need to do. And we've all been trying to get this wisdom out there for such a long time, and it's such an important thing to do. In 1985, Drew, who lived a couple doors down from the public library, was constantly reading crazy books, and he turned me on to Carlos Castaneda's work and a few other related works. And once I started digging into that, my fire was completely lit, and I became obsessed with searching the scriptures, so to speak. I started regularly browsing through the local independent bookstores, and that's where I discovered the Swim and Barry. And it took some time for this perspective to sink into my consciousness. I was reading it, I liked it, but these insights began to ever so slowly validate many of the intuitions I held regarding my own existence and the role of the human in the unfolding story of the universe. Time is too short today to tell all of the details of the incredible journey I shared with Drew over the next decade of our lives from the age of 15 to 25, but I will say emphatically that it was clear to Drew and I from a very early age that the work of Swim and Barry and the other influential scholars such as Joseph Campbell, whose book and video series, The Power of Myth, came out in our senior year in high school in 1988, that there was something deep happening in our young hearts and minds when we engaged with this type of thinking that was backed up by decades upon decades upon decades upon decades of research of these esteemed scholars. We were searching the scriptures, but it was clear to us that we were provided with the cliff notes to the perennial philosophy, or what we like to call at the time, the deal. Anytime we encountered something that was talking about the unified cosmic process, we said, that's the deal right there. We need to search this out. And we pretty much have. And Drew's never stopped. I mean, he just keeps going, So I have a big library, and Drew's library is like 8 times bigger than me. He's competing with Thomas Berry at this point, with like 5,000 books. But the new cosmology was amplifying our experience of our own human creatureness, and particularly our powers of self-awareness and self-reflection. And by searching the scriptures, we were finding those special traits that made us uniquely human. For lack of a better word, we were finding our gift, uncovering our personal mythology. We were finding ourselves in the midst of a living cosmology and aligning our hearts and minds to the deep truths of our existence contained within that story, our story. And this story was both believable and empowering. As Joseph Campbell once said, the first function of a mythology is to awaken and maintain in the individual a sense of wonder and participation in the mystery of this finely inscrutable universe. And this is precisely what Barry's work had done for us as teenagers. The new cosmology gave us permission to dive in, to fully participate in the mystery of this finely inscrutable universe. Barry's vision of the great work beckoned us to strive to help create the next phase of the human story, of the story of planet Earth, and it validated our understanding of ourselves as children of the universe. It was this invitation to participate in the unfolding universe story and the opening of our hearts and minds that it engenders that I believe provides us with the blueprint for how we as the human community must reinvent ourselves within the context of an ever-evolving, non-dual, unified cosmic process. And as Barry so eloquently said, the universe, the divine, and you, and you, and you, and you, and all of us, and me, are one reality functioning within its own spontaneity. Thank you.